Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. Please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I am very excited to say I have the return of Tom Peters, who has previously been on the podcast before. Now, Tom, for those of you who don't know him, is an author of numerous business books. His most famous one is the 1982 seminal book, In Search of Excellence, which he co-authored with Robert H. Waterman Jr. I think he's written, and he'll correct me on this, 18, possibly he's working on the 19th right now, but he's also an internationally renowned sort of management speaker, commentator, etc., etc. In fact, he's just a legend. So I just want to say, Tom, hello, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for being a guest.
It's great to be back. I'm not sure I can live up to the legend part. By the way, I want to start by thanking you. When you mentioned In Search of Excellence, I am always thrilled when somebody says with Robert H. Waterman. It was a co-authored venture, and I get too much of the credit.
Perfect. Well, you're welcome. So, Tom, just for those people that are not necessarily that familiar with your work, can you give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch on you and the work that you do?
The work that became In Search of Excellence started in 1977. The Americans, of course, had come out of World War II in relatively good shape. Suddenly, our roads were filled with Hondas, Toyotas, and Nissans, and everybody was saying that the only people who knew how to manage were the Japanese. Mm-hmm. I was working at McKinsey at the time, and we said, basically, absolutely true, we're getting the crap beaten out of us, but there are a handful of American companies that still work. And so I spent 2 or 3 years wandering around, including the UK, talking to academics, looking at companies, and we came up with American companies that we thought worked, and actually many of them have stood the test of time. But the important thing about it was that I was at McKinsey. McKinsey was all about strategy, and what we found at these companies was people, the so-called soft stuff.
Yeah,
I've said to many people, my whole life can be summarized in 6 words. Hard is soft, soft is hard. The numbers are what's squishy, and the relationships are what's hard. And when I say that, by the way, not as a matter of arrogance, I hope, I tell them this is not coming from a philosophy major from Cambridge. It is coming from someone with 4 quant degrees from a business school in engineering. So I know the difference between 1 and 1 equals 2 and what have you. But the people message, I also said somebody recently, I'd love to have my bank account enhanced by having you buy all 18 of my books. But the reality is I've said the same damn time 18 things in a row. People, yes. people, relationships. Shut your mouth and listen.
Yes.
And, that's not totally unfair.
No, I mean,
I have to say one last thing.
Of course.
The book took off like a jackrabbit, and it just happens to be a pet peeve of mine. It was not a bad book, but we had timing not to believe. The gods intervened. Nothing makes me more irritated in the world. I was actually in London one time, and I was being driven around by whoever it was who sponsored my event. And the driver turned around to me at one time. He said, "There are two kinds of people who sit in the back seat of this car." And I said, "All right," I bite. And he said, "There are people who remember their roots, and there are people who think they deserve to be back there." And nothing pisses me off more than a very successful person who thinks they deserve it. I am a victim of blind luck.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and so the thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about today, because you've actually been writing some more right now, and you've recently penned a piece called Excellence 2020, the 27 number ones, which I believe actually came out like 38 years actually since the publication of In Search of Excellence. But you were also going to, like, when you were just finishing kind of writing the 27, then the pandemic kind of hit and everything changed. And you've also reflected that some of the ideas will need to be put on hold, but also several are becoming ever more important than before.
Right.
So I just wanted to get a flavor, because that if people want to look it up, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes, as the Excellent 2020 is available from your website. But I wanted to get a view from you as what ideas do you think will likely go on to hold and become more important as we adjust to this new kind of working reality? And also, which ones are going to be far more important than before, and why?
Yeah. Well, I live about 80 miles from Boston, and our headline was the Four Seasons hotels, top end, $1 billion a night, had laid off 50% of their staff, and the ones they had kept, they had shortchanged on the benefits that they owed them. And so my point in telling that story is that some leaders have responded to COVID-19 with great humanity. And some of them, if this wasn't a family show, I would swear like the Navy man I used to be. And some of them have...
Tom, knock yourself out, really.
No, they responded like assholes.
There you go.
And there's stronger words that I could use, like 3 modifiers for asshole, but we will stop short of that. My brutal point, Adrian, that I have said to everybody on podcasts and so on is, and I believe this is a once every 100 years moment. And in the case of the Americans now, the civil unrest, and what you have done as a leader in the last 2 months and what you will do as a leader in the next 2 months will define you as an adult human being. Back to that unspeakable language, fuck this one up and you fucked up your life's reputation. I mean, this is a very big deal.
This is history. The way I see it, Tom, is like, there's history with the pandemic, and then there's a social unrest. So we're in history squared territory right now.
I think that's a great way of saying it. There's another way of saying it that I really love. There's a New York Times columnist whose name is David Brooks, and he wrote a column, I think it was a couple months ago, and he distinguished between resume virtues and eulogy virtues.
Yeah.
And he said the resume virtues are: I graduated from Oxford, I graduated from Stanford with honors, I went to work for an interesting company, I was promoted 5 times in the first 5 years, blah, 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 have a net worth that's, too high to believe.
Yeah.
The eulogy virtues are totally: what kind of a guy was Adrian? What kind of a guy was Tom? Did he bend over backwards and then some to help people out, and so on? And I just love that distinction.
Yeah.
And admittedly, I'm a lot older than most of the people who are listening to us, but it's never too early to work on those resume virtues. And incidentally, damn it, as somebody who's looked at business performance over 40 years, if you treat people well, you end up making more money, for Christ's sakes. Maybe it doesn't meet the immediate next 90-day shareholder value maximization crap, But McKinsey did this piece of research a few years ago based on 800 companies. They looked at 167 that by some very analytic measures had invested regularly in people and for the long term. And the ones who invested for the long term in people had destroyed the others in terms of long-term financial performance.
Yeah.
So, it's be a good human being, but from a businessman standpoint, it ain't about altruism.
No, looking after people. That's it. I mean, it's like, that's the bottom line. Look after your people, and everything else will take care of itself.
Yeah. Well,
So
somebody wrote one of those one-liners, and I usually don't like things like this, but it's pretty good. If you care about what they care about, then they will care about what you care about. And, I think that was Luke chapter 7, verse 23 or something.
Right. I remember there's a favorite quote of mine. You'll probably recognize the guy. There's a guy called American author called Zig Ziglar, who wrote a book called "See You at the Top." And there was a quote that comes from that book which says, "If you help enough people get what they want, then you'll get what you want."
Yeah, absolutely. Same, and right on the money. The other quote relative to the business thing, which that comes from the very quotable Richard Branson.
Mm-hmm.
Business has to give people enriching, rewarding lives, or it's not worth doing.
Yeah.
And that's in that same basket as the couple you and I have just exchanged.
Absolutely. So which of these ones do you think, I mean, is it all that, the thing to focus on in all these 27 number ones you've kind of, you collected over time, is like leadership and people and focusing on the people? Those are the things that are just, top of the charts by a margin right now, or are there other things that people need to be kind of thinking about that become ever more important right now?
Well, I think those are absolutely at the top of the chart. I do want to say, because I'm not completely deaf, dumb, and blind, that I completely acknowledge the nightmare of the person who had a 12-table restaurant in Boston or London or some town of 10,000, and has a mortgage on the building that the restaurant's in, and is hit with COVID-19. And obviously, he's got to lay people off. She's got to lay people off. But you can do things to help them transition. You can at least, there's a friend of mine who went through that in the 2006 crash and had to lay people off. She was devastated by it. And I was talking to somebody who knew her well, and they said Christine's exit interviews were such that usually by the end of the interview, the person who was laid off was hugging Christine and telling her it was going to be okay. So even the nastiest of things can be done with great humanity. You can little stuff relative to what you can. We still will have customers. There was a restaurant, or there was a restaurant I saw a picture of, and it was small. And out on the street, this was at the beginning of the worst of the COVID-19, they had moved their big kitchen refrigerator out to the street in front of the restaurant. And it was filled with things that people couldn't get at that particular time, available for free for anybody who walked by. Those little gestures go a long way. And again, to say this is a virtuous circle, if you did treat your people well, if you did stick the refrigerator out in front of the shop or store or restaurant, you're building up loyal customers who will recommend you to others, even if they can't come in and sit at a table right now.
Absolutely.
So I don't think there's much that I think I may have edited a later version. I don't think there's anything on that list that you can't be working on at this moment, frankly.
I think, and the one thing I wanted to do, I think it's sort of it's sort of you introduced it, and you've been talking a lot about this thing, and it's also one of the kind of the 27 number ones. And it comes in at number 11, and it's this idea of extreme humanization, and I just really like that idea, that phrase. One, because it's like we're going through kind of extraordinary, remarkable kind of times, and it's the humanity that's coming out. It's all like the best and the worst of us kind of right now in many parts. But I wanted to, if you can explain to me the kind of what you mean by the extreme humanization, and
Well,
why it's needed, why it's important.
Yeah, I'm gonna respond with something that's not about COVID-19. Uh, the hardest part of writing a book is picking the little quote that goes at the beginning,
Yeah.
the epilogue. At any rate, I am going to read you, and it's not going to take that much time.
Okay.
What I used for that in The Excellence Dividend. Janet Dugan, a healthcare architect, took inspiration from her recent experience of having an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging scan. While she was lying still and waiting, she noticed a small mirror that had been placed below the head support piece. It was angled so that she could see through the barrel to the radiology technician and make eye contact with him. Quote, "What a small thing," she told me. Quote, "and what an enormous difference it made. I felt less alone. I was connected to another human being at the very moment I needed support. And even though I'm not claustrophobic, it calmed me some to be able to see out of the barrel. I saw that the technician was friendly and that the nurse went out of her way to make me laugh. I firmly believe in the power of design to contribute to the healing process, that architecture can shape events and transform lives." But that day, in that experience, the thing that really gave me comfort was a tiny mirror about as big as a Band-Aid. And that is the perfect example of extreme humanization. You've got a gazillion-dollar machine, and some human being who works in that hospital had the breakthrough genius idea, to put a mirror that probably cost $4.72 and took 10 minutes to install, which changed the entire physiology or psychology for the person having the MRI. And that's I mean, the extreme humanization stuff, Adrian, to me is always the small touches.
Yeah.
Because frankly, it's the small stuff. Now I'm really being ridiculous. I read you one epigraph, and now I'm going to read you a second epigraph.
Go for it.
The epigraph to my prior book that is called The Little Big Things is a quote from an American statesman by the name of Henry Clay. And the quote is, "Courtesies of a small and trivial character are the ones which strike deepest in the grateful and appreciating heart." And that's solid gold to me, but it's little touches, little touches, little touches. It's not about strategy. It's not about big investments. It's not about updating your software. And the other piece of that is getting bigger and bigger in my mind, and back to that word that you said it was okay to use, there is a special effects guy in New Zealand who has a company that works mainly for Peter Jackson.
Yeah.
And he was asked somewhere, what's your secret to success? And he said, "I only have one: never hire assholes."
Yeah.
And I quoted a guy in my last book whose name is Peter Miller, who runs a biotech startup by the name of Optinos. And he said, "Our secret is we only hire nice people."
Yeah.
And what he really pointed out is he's talking about for every job.
Yeah.
He said, "Okay, so I have this need for some person with an obscure bioscience degree." Well, guess what? There are actually quite a few people out there in the world who got that degree. Hire the nice ones. And, if you hire nice people, and particularly for those who have businesses with first line managers, never, ever, 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 ever again, as long as you live, promote anybody into any managerial position who is not loaded to the roof with empathy. That,
Yeah.
EQ thing, emotional quotient, and so on. You want people who treat people well. Don't hire or promote people who don't treat people well.
Yeah. So I mean, Tom, but I mean, I applaud that. I get it. I'm in complete agreement with you. I mean, that's why I call you a legend, because I guess it's like a self confirmation sort of thing. Right?
Hey,
It's like going, you saying that, like,
in that case, it's okay to call me a legend.
there you go. So it's like, and so but then I know that you've been talking about this for such a long time. And the thing I wanted to understand is that there's many of these ideas are getting talked about and shared and things, but we still feel like there's not a lot of doing a real action. I mean, what do you think that is? I mean, what's actually stopping people and organizations actually kind of getting this and doing something about it?
Yeah.
I mean, because that
Well,
pisses me off, man. That's the honest truth.
I've been on the warpath for 40 years about business schools. I graduated from one, and a very good one, Stanford. But the focus is on the quantitative stuff. The focus is on accounting. The focus is on marketing analysis.
Yeah. No, I guess.
Much of my answer is I can't figure it out.
Right.
The research is there that says take care of people and good things will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And examples are, this is not exactly in response. If somebody like the motivational speaker, Tony Robbins, speaks to 1,000 people, he expects to change 1,000 lives.
Mm.
If I speak to 1,000 people, I will be thrilled out of my mind if 5 of those people take something away that helps them make big change. And, so there's the reality is people like me, the so-called management gurus, I guess it pays the bills, but I'll never forgive The Economist magazine for having invented that term.
Just for you, Tom.
One of our problems is that management gurus act as if the Fortune 500 and the FTSE 100 were the only companies that existed in the world.
Yeah.
And the real reality is, whether it's the UK or Nigeria or the United States or Mexico, the essence of the economy is small and medium-sized firms.
Yeah.
And so I think the good news is there is a lot of exceptionally positive behavior that goes on, but it doesn't get reported in the FT, and it doesn't get reported in Bloomberg Business Week, and it's not coming. Giant companies, I've said this many times. One of my old McKinsey pals did a big quant study, and he looked at 1,000 publicly traded companies over a 40-year period of time. Not one of them outperformed the market over that 40-year period of time. 0 for 1,000.
Right.
So as far as I'm concerned, the reality is big companies suck, and some of them suck faster than others.
Yeah.
And I've been in audiences with big company people. I've always said, take risks. You're on the way downhill anyway. Might as well enjoy the trip.
But maybe it's actually kind of like it's like a dimension on. It's just another reflection of what you said right at the beginning, is that hard is soft and soft is hard, right? And actually being quant led and kind of like numbers led and doing all the kind of the mechanical sort of stuff, that's easy, right? But it's actually being personable, being reasonable, developing your EQ, being empathetic, being vulnerable, being kind of like humble, all of those different things is hard work, and it requires emotional labor. And it's sometimes, and many people find that hard, because it is exhausting.
Well, it's exhausting, and there's a quote that I don't have at hand from a book whose title I don't remember.
Just make it up.
Yeah. Other than that, I'd suggest you read it. The author at some point tells a vignette. He was a consultant, and he was at the quarterly or whatever meeting of a big mid-sized company, sitting next to the CEO. And as he said, all these stories of success came out, and they'd done this with teams, and they'd done this with the little tiny experiential extreme humanization studies, touches, and so on. And he said, he turned to the CEO and he said, all of this stuff is obvious. Why don't other CEOs do it? And I think the answer the CEO gave is profound and not silly. And the CEO said, I think they're embarrassed. You know, unless they're looking at a spreadsheet, they feel that they're not doing honest work. You know, Hewlett Packard has come upon hard times, and Hewlett Packard has disappointed me beyond belief. But Hewlett Packard was the poster child of In Search of Excellence. And when Bob Waterman and I went down to visit HP for the first time, we were taught about the HP way. And at the center of the HP way is MBWA, managing by wandering around.
Sure.
And I've said to people, managing by wandering around metaphorically has become the centerpiece of what I've done.
Yeah.
Managing by wandering around is like being in touch with the people who do the work.
Yeah.
Getting out of the office. And this is a pathetic admission, my wife and I, not this year, unfortunately, have a little tiny house on the beach in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And we go there for a couple months each North American winter. And you would think that at the age of 77, walking on a beautiful beach in New Zealand, that I wouldn't still be thinking about frigging MBWA. I mean, that's tragic. But I was. And, you know, having written about it and so on for 40 years, I had a breakthrough on the beach. And this is really important. I thought, why do you do MBWA? You know, you want to hear from the people at the front line. You want to be in touch with the real work and so on. And I said, no, Tom, you've got it all wrong. You do MBWA because it's fun. It is terrific to be out there with the distribution center team at 1 a.m. in the morning, swapping stories, talking about the fish that they didn't bring into the boat.
Yeah.
And I said, if you don't have fun doing MBWA, please go back to your office, get out a piece of paper, use a pen, and write down on that piece of paper, I quit, I resign. If you don't get off on people, don't enjoy that midnight visit, don't enjoy the visit to the finance department.
Yeah.
You know, just get the bloody hell out of leadership. There's another wonderful quote that has 3 words. There was a 3-star general in the U.S. Army by the name of Melvin Zace, who was famous for doing a lot of the things he's supposed to do particularly well. And he gave a speech to the Army War College once. And he said, there are 3 words that will give you an excellent career. And he said, the 3 words are, you must care.
Yeah.
And, you know, so whether we're talking about sailors going into battle in the North Atlantic on a broken down Royal Navy destroyer, or whether we're talking about the modern world or talking about a restaurant, you must care.
Yeah.
And, you know, and again, I'm, as I said before, which is great because I'll just keep repeating it as long as I have a chance. Don't hire the ones who don't have that instinct, and don't promote at all or ever the ones who don't have that instinct. There
Excellent.
are plenty of decent people around, and don't get conned by some great technical expert excellence that this person has. And incidentally, Adrian, something I'm totally irritated because it wasn't around for my last book. There was a piece that I read, and then I went and checked it out. Google did a study of its top employees and its most creative teams. Mm-hmm. The top employees shared 8 traits, and the first 7 of the 8 were all soft skills.
Yeah.
Listening, takes diversity seriously, and so on and so on. Mm-hmm. Then they went to look at the most creative teams. And Google is one of those stupid companies that classifies people as A players or B players, which is a perfect tactic for demotivating 50% of the population.
Yeah.
But at any rate, in terms of creative teams, the B player teams wildly outperformed the A player teams. And it was the same deal. They were more creative because they listened, they respected each other, and so on and so forth. And so again, the point there is it holds this, you must care, blah, 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 holds as much for a super duper top over the moon technology company as it does for a restaurant.
Perfect. So I wanted to share a story with you of another gentleman that I met, a Dutch guy called Martijn Gribnow, who's now the Chief Transformation Officer, I think, at Genworth Financial in the US, and he talks about his own approach to it, which I think you'll really love, because it sort of almost brings the whole management by wandering about to life. But his approach is, whenever he takes on a new job, and he's a veteran of a whole bunch of transformation projects, whether from telecoms to IPsoft to a bunch of big companies. And he said that the first thing that he does when he takes on a new role is he spends the first month working sort of undercover as an intern to really understand the business around what can be changed and what will be harder to change. And it gives him a really kind of like soup to nuts kind of view of things, really honest view of things. And when he's and then when he's kind of in position, he splits his time 3 ways. He says, I spend a third of my time hanging out with people on the front line, just to understand kind of, what they go through, to listen to customers, to hear from them, and so on and so forth. He says the next third of his kind of like time, he spends just wandering about the business. It's because that way he gets a better understanding of how things work and who does what. And then he spends the remaining third of his time doing what he said in like air quotes, kind of like the proper work, having meetings and writing emails and things. And he said, and that's kind of the way that he operates. And it's almost like before he takes a role, he actually lays that out for the people that are hiring him and says, this is what I'm going to do. If you don't like it, then don't hire me, but this is how I operate. And I just thought I would share that with you as like somebody who's doing it in practice live now today.
Absolutely. No, I think that is, spectacular, beyond measure. I want to make one reinforcing point and then go a little off the dimension, but same deal. Mm-hmm. There's a guy who was a senior officer at a giant insurance company. Has done 100 startups, and he started out by going to the U.S. Naval Academy, and he got assigned to a ship. He was a supply corps officer. Mm-hmm. And he said the captain called him in, and the captain said, you went to the Naval Academy, you've had a couple of other tours, and now you're here with me. He said, as a matter of course, I expect you to do your job very well. But he said, that's not what I'm going to evaluate you on. I am going to evaluate you on how you took care of your sailors. How many of your sailors were doing extra education in the part-time? How many of your sailors got promoted to better jobs? He said, that's what your evaluation is, 100%. He said, it was kind of like the third. He said, listen, I expect you to get that damn first third right. And the last 2/3 are how you take care of people. The other thing I wanted to add to that, Adrian, which is kind of on the dimension, there's a guy by the name of Dov Froman, who was a big deal Intel executive, and also is considered kind of the father of half of Israel's high-tech industries. And he wrote a book called Leadership the Hard Way. And there's a lot of great stuff in it. But the one thing I remember, and every manager listening to us, their mouth is going to drop open, but do it, damn it. He said a leader should have about 50% of her or his time unscheduled. You know, that bullshit of running frantically from meeting to meeting to meeting doesn't cut it. He said the leader is hired to be thoughtful, to think, da. He said you just can't be a schedule slave. And the other thing he said, which I remember one little story about that, he took over some big company maybe 25 years ago, or piece of it, and all the senior executives had personal assistants. And he said the first thing I did was tell them they had to all get rid of their personal assistants. He said, I didn't want the personal assistant scheduling their time. I wanted them to be scheduling their time. I wanted them to be able to understand the things they were doing that they didn't really need how to do. But I don't think many people listening to us are going to hit that 50% mark. But for God's sakes, why not 20%? Sure. I bet the average person listening to us, because of the fact that they're hard workers and they're trying to make their business better, I bet you if they have 5% on scheduled time, it's a miracle.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. But you got to create that space.
The other thing, by the way, is I want to tell every leader who's listening to us, there's another one of Tom's laws. If you, as a boss, are ever 30 seconds late to a meeting that you called, you are a first-class stupid jerk. Being late to a meeting as a boss is a big, major sign of disrespect and failure to value the time of the people who are at the meeting. And I'm being serious about this. You're the boss. Adrian's the boss. And Adrian's been in a meeting with a guy who's 3 levels above him. A big deal. You know, the time is coming when Adrian's going back to Adrian's meeting. He turns to the guy who's running the big meeting, who is his boss's boss, and he says, look, this is important what we're doing. I appreciate it, but I've got a meeting that I previously scheduled with my senior team members, and I can't be late, and so I'm going to have to excuse myself. And, you know, first of all, the boss's boss is probably going to respect him 3 times more for doing that. You can't be late. You can't show disrespect for people.
Spot on. So let me ask you this, kind of, Tom. I mean, all of this sort of stuff, and I love it when I feel like kind of every time I speak to you, and it sounds like we've had this ongoing conversation, but this is only the second time. It's almost like I just need to toss up the ball to you and just watch you smash it out the park, and I'm just going to sit back and listen and just kind of like just and enjoy kind of you just telling stories. The thing I wanted to ask you about was and sort of to change it up a little bit is almost like my focus is on service and experience. I mean, ultimately my focus is on how do we build organizations that create better outcomes for both their customers and their people, right? That's kind of my shtick, as it were. But if you think forward and we think about service-driven organizations or experience-driven organizations, I mean, what do you think from your perspective, what are the things that they need to do to be successful, to get right, and all these things, and to bring them through the hard times as well, because there's many more to come, kind of very, based on kind of where we are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you said it when we were preparing for the interview, and then you asked about it a few minutes ago. I think a lot of the answer is that extreme humanization.
Right.
I think a lot of the answer is having 40 people on your payroll, and every single one of them is devoted. Remember our little story of the mirror?
Yeah.
Band-Aid sized mirror that changed the customer's perspective on the transaction, patient in this case. I want all 40 of my people looking for that.
Yeah.
That's not the product development department. I want the accountants looking for it. I want the HR looking for it. I want the, I have a term that I call TGRs, things gone right.
Yeah.
And I want every single person in the organization to be adding little touches here and little touches there. If you're in a staff department like finance, your role in life is to make your clients, that is the other departments in the company, to make their life better.
Yeah.
Be clear about what you're doing, to get their advice on how you can help them do their job better. And then with the people who are in direct customer contact, it's the same deal. And to me, one of the 3 or 4 most profound things that I've learned is small things are infinitely better than big things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that quote that says that's what sticks in your mind.
Yeah.
I remember when you went, I said to somebody, I said, here's what bosses should be doing. I have an employee who works for me. First of all, if you're a boss and you've been in the job for 6 months and you do not know the name of every child of every employee who works for you and where they are in their education, you're on that jerk list. And the definition of a good boss is David's mother is going into the hospital in a couple of days for a really serious surgery.
Mm.
You, who are David's boss, sends David's mom flowers to home and wishes her well. And if you are engaged with your people, this isn't a matter of Machiavellianism. You should know what's going on in your people's life. You should have known that David's mom was in trouble.
Yeah.
Another way that I like to put that, which is a little bit different, is if you are a boss with 15 people, how many communication strategies do you need? 15.
Yes.
Not one single human being is like any other single human being.
Mm-hmm.
And people need to be treated as they need to be treated, not by some formulaic way of doing stuff.
I think
But
right.
It's all the extreme humanization, and it's extreme humanization inside the company that generates extreme humanization outside the company.
Absolutely.
I can't go order the housekeepers to be nice to the guests unless I'm being nice to the housekeepers.
Yeah. No, completely. I mean, it's a bit like that sort of thing. Is like where some people will try and delegate, to your point about kind of executive assistants. They will delegate it to an executive assistant. But what you're doing is you're almost like abrogating responsibility for caring about what happens.
I think that's we will remember that. I may steal the line and use it, but yes, you are abrogating responsibility for caring. That is a beautiful line.
Thank you.
Take 3 seconds and pat yourself on the back.
There you go. I'm passing myself right now. Perfect.
Man.
Well, I mean, that feels like a good place to finish. That we're talking about this extreme humanization kind of, Tom. But before we do, I've been asking. First of all, I also want to thank you for allowing me to kind of quote the excellence dividend in my latest book, Punk CX, because I thought the way you described service was just absolutely spot on in true kind of Thomas Peters style. But what I've been doing since its publication has been asking people a couple of questions. It's almost a bit of ongoing kind of research. It's almost like word association questions. And so what I wanted to do was to ask you, what 1 or 2 words would you use to describe a more punk approach to either service or experience or extreme humanization?
Be kind.
Perfect. Love it.
I'm just going to expand on this.
Yeah.
2 things about, there's an American author, well known, I don't know, 80, 70 years ago. His name is Henry James.
Uh-huh.
And the Henry James quote is, there are 3 important things in human life. The first one is to be kind. The second one is to be kind. And the third one is to be kind. And so 2 words, be kind. And those 2 words, which goes back to the beginning of our conversation, are literally 752 times more important than they were before COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. And so the second question is, what sort of company or brand do you think epitomizes that sort of approach?
Well, I wish I could quote chapter and verse, but I just read yesterday, and I just didn't read the 800 words or 1,000 words, which I should have done prior to this conversation. The woman who is president of Patagonia just retired. And all the stuff I saw said that she was just a magnificent human being on all dimensions. And so, 100 cheers to her. She at the moment is very much at the top of my list.
That's not because she must have taken over after Yvonne Chouinard.
Right.
Yeah, but I think they are a company to behold. I mean, the way that they go about things, the way that Yvonne Chouinard actually set up the company initially, is brilliant, and they're just continuing on the legacy, and they do some great work, and really take care of their people. So yeah, fair play.
So she gets the nod, even though I don't remember her name. But I'm 77, so I don't remember anything. So.
Yeah. But Tom, that's awesome. I mean, just finally, just wanted to say thank you for that. Thank you for still banging the drum. I am going to go. I've got my own drum, which is kind of plays a pretty similar kind of beat to yours. But I just want to say thank you for what you do, and thank you for the time and sharing your insight and experience with us today. That's been awesome.
Well, thank you very much. And the only thing I guess I would add that should have been in the middle of this is we're going through this work from home stage that may last a long, long time. People who are working from home are not supposed to try to match their productivity. The number one responsibility of the person who is working from home is to take care of themselves, take care of their family, take care of their relatives, and take care of members of their community. That's the primary judgment. And it ain't a normal time, and normal behavior is not to be expected. And if you're a boss, it's really great it's really fine if 7 people in a 14-person group are really tuned out for the next 3 or 4 days. Taking care of yourself, family, and community is priority number 1.
Hear, hear. Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.